Welcome to EduChum friends. This video is related to MEG1 British poetry and we are learning about the life of Edmund Spenser, one of the most important Renaissance poets in England at that point, which was 16th century. Spenser was born in London in 1552 and then he went on gradually to become one of the most famous poets in England. He came from a poor family, but he had a remote connection with a noble family that had become rich through sheep rearing, which was a growth industry in the 16th century in England. After his initial schooling in a grammar school, he went on to study in the prestigious Cambridge University. Key points that we must remember about Edward Spencer's life is that he had a poor background. He did not come from a noble family, so it was not easy for him to establish himself as a poet compared to people who came from a noble background, because they would have political connections, they would have they would move in literary circles, so it would have been much more easy for them as compared to Edmund Spenser. Moving on, when he was at Cambridge, he came across the works of various famous authors and writers from different parts of the world. He studied all the important literary works, and all of these this process of reading really shaped his way of thinking. And we see his thought process getting reflected in his creations later. His important works, like the Fairy Queen, being the most important one, the most famous one, we can notice how all his readings have come together and created a unique thought process which shows the mind of a person who has read a lot of literature. Now we talk about religion and Spenser. Religion played a very important role in Spenser's life, just like any other person's life. We see traces and hints of how his own religious beliefs were moving towards Plato's beliefs. Plato was a person who had a lot of influence, especially in Italy. The Renaissance had come to Italy also in Europe, and Plato was a person whose thoughts, his ideas, his works, his books were influencing the thought at that time. So, in that time period, we see Spenser also moving towards or giving hints of moving towards Platonism. We also notice in Spenser's work how he himself was moving towards humanism, a philosophy that focuses on human values like kindness, uh, emotions, giving importance to the human being as opposed to anything else. Spenser became good friends with a man named Sir Philip Sidney, and this friendship proved to be quite beneficial for Spenser. Spenser, we remember that he came from a poor background. He was not born into money. He was not born into a very privileged family or a noble family. But Sir Philip Sidney was, and because he made friends with Sir Philip Sidney, this helped him develop important connections, which helped him establish his political career also. Spenser could not only afford to live on poetry, so he worked on poetry while giving a lot of his energy to his political career. As an administrator, he started working. He worked with the Lord of Ireland, and this took him to Ireland. And there, Ireland was the place where he ended up writing most of his important works. He spent many, many years of his adult life in Ireland. So, this movement to Ireland proved to be a very important movement in his life. Unfortunately, Sir Philip Sidney had an early death, and we know that Spenser had a genuine friendship with Sir Philip Sidney because he mourns his loss in an elegy later. Now we talk about Spenser's life in Ireland because it was very much in Ireland that Spenser wrote his best works. From Ireland, he returned for a short period to England and presented the initial three books of the Fairy Queen to the Queen. She really liked the work, and then in the next year, his first three books of the Fairy Queen got published. It was here in Ireland itself that he had got married to his second wife, Elizabeth Boyle, a very important person. A lot of his works are focused on the relationship that he had with Elizabeth Boyle. We see these mentions in Amoretti, the epithalamion, and the prothalamion also. So his relationship, the happiness he experienced, the wooing, the journey of wooing her, the journey of eventually winning her love, the journey of marrying her, developing a close, beautiful bond with her, and then gaining to know her, understanding her spiritual nature, appreciating the beauty, her spiritual beauty, going beyond what is physical. So it is this relationship that Spencer has really centered on in three of his most important works. If we analyze Spencer's life overall, we can see that Spencer may appear to outsiders to be chasing political power, social power, and not only focusing his efforts in developing his career as a poet. This is true, but this can be seen in another light by understanding that he had to acquire social supremacy to move in elite literary circles so that his poetry would get known, would get published, would get applauded by the people who were in positions of power. So he utilized the power he gained by moving up in society, by doing political roles. He utilized these powers and this eliteness that he acquired through his efforts in his career for the benefit of his career as a poet. Maybe if he did not have that kind of social standing, the kind he worked towards, maybe his poems would have found it very difficult to find a place in society at that point. Another thing we notice is that his positioning as a poet is a bit different compared to the positioning of other poets. Other poets would write about negative things, some negative feelings, but Spencer tried his best on several of his works. He appears to be praising, he appears to be focusing on the positive aspects of life, of relationships, of love. He's positioning himself as a successful man. He's not positioning himself as someone who is worthy of pity compared to others. So this was again something to be analyzed because others were born in a position of privilege, so they did not have much qualms in positioning themselves as pitiable creatures or creatures who have issues with life, who focus on the negatives. With Spencer, it was the opposite because he was born into issues, poverty, pretty much, low end strata of society. He did the opposite. He positioned himself as somebody who was successful. So this was a marked difference we can notice in his positioning as a poet. Spencer's celebration of his beloved, the one he loves, who's essentially the person mentioned here is Elizabeth Boyle, is that of a man who has arrived, who is successful. For by the time of the writing of these poems, Spencer was already established as a poet. His Fairy Queen had been well received, and he was doing quite well professionally. On the personal front, he had engaged in a beautiful relationship which had eventually culminated in marriage. Now, marriage was seen as the success of any relationship. If you like this video, hit the subscribe button for more such videos later to learn about MEG1, Masters in English course. Thank you for watching EduCharms.